Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the EA Global Summit 2024. My name is Ryan Schmier from Sparx Services North America, and I'm joined today by Patrick Simon from Beehive Technology. I'll introduce Patrick in a second, but this session here is all about the case for enterprise architecture in the government. And so Patrick's going to be stepping us through a lot of context on why EA is so important in the government space. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We are planning on having time for live Q&A at the end of the session. If you have questions that you'd like to ask, please go ahead and use the Q&A feature within the GoTo platform. Otherwise, you can also enter your questions in on the Slack channel for the Summit event. If you are watching this recording after the event on YouTube, you can go ahead and email sales@sparxsystems.us, and we will connect you with Patrick or any of our other presenters to get your questions answered. So with that, I'm going to make Patrick the presenter here, and then I'll go ahead and do an introduction. We'll get it going. Okay, so a little bit of an introduction about Patrick. Patrick Simon from Beehive Technology Solutions out of California has a distinguished career as a successful technologist and digital innovator, especially in government, education, and healthcare. His career spanned all levels of IT solutions, enterprise architecture, and enterprise IT, converging IT, IoT, OT in the enterprise domain of risk and security, both physical and cyber. He also deals with privacy and compliance and resilience operations. Patrick is it focuses on government, education, healthcare, and is really a digital enterprise practitioner who helps organizations lead digital acceleration and digital transformation projects. So as organizations face the complexities and the challenges of doing digital transformation, Patrick and his company Beehive are there to help them. And he's really passionate and excited about the journey to the new digital automated enterprise and AI frontier. Patrick was served for almost 21 years on active duty in the U.S. military and 25 years in public government, federal, state, city, and tribal. He's a former CIO, CTO, and CSO, and former Chief of Enterprise Architecture for the Secretary of Defense, U.S. MEPCOM. So with that, let me hand this over to Patrick Simon. We're glad to have you with us today talking about EA in government.
Hello. And thank you all for being here. I hope I am being heard right now. I'll speak to a little bit of the history of enterprise architecture in government in the United States. And actually, its beginnings started sometime and can be traced back to the 1980s when some large corporations started to realize that they were doing work with the government, and the added complexity of all of that had some real value, and enterprise architecture seemed to be something that they could use to start aligning their IT systems to both business and government goals and objectives. And in the 1990s, the government really started to understand the value of EA, and then the push started to happen to start understanding the complexity of IT systems and reduce the redundancy and all of the inefficiencies across the various government agencies that they were encountering. Right about that time, in the middle of the 1990s, that's when they passed the Klinger-Cohen Act of 1996. And it was at that time that a significant milestone was achieved for enterprise architecture. Out of that act, it mandated that federal agencies establish a CIO, the Chief Information Officer, to see IT management. So that's where that was born. It also mandated that the government develop and maintain an integrated IT architecture, and it wanted to ensure that IT investments of the government were aligned with agencies and strategic goals. This, of course, was designed to improve efficiency and the effectiveness of IT operations in government. So we can say that the Klinger-Cohen Act is actually at the foundation of enterprise architecture beginnings in the U.S. federal government. Sometime around 1999, that's when the Office of Management and Budget developed FIAF, and that's the Federal Enterprise Architecture Framework, which you will see featured in our presentation today. FIAF actually featured an approach for federal agencies to develop and implement and maintain their enterprise architecture. And its intention was to build a common language and a set of practices for enterprise architecture across the federal government. FIAF itself has several major components, and you'll see those in our presentation today as well. Performance reference model, and of course, here's where your strategic planning is taking place as well. The business reference model, the service component reference model, the technical reference model, and the data reference model. I like to also add that there are major um, artifacts required as a mandate to do federal enterprise architecture framework, which is now also synonymous to what you'll probably see in a lot of publications as FEA2. And out of that, there are those mandatory artifacts that are required as a result of those those specific desires that OMB, specifically OMB Circular A130, requires in the enforcement of their goals and objectives in the federal government of the United States. One particular area that has really accelerated the desire and the need and the mandate for federal enterprise architecture, and that is the FISMA Act, the Federal Information Security Act. It is a USC code law, and it does specifically call out federal enterprise architecture as part of that mandate, and that also traces to the NIST risk management framework and NIST 837 Rev 2, which are the control families that are implemented as part of that process. And you'll see a little bit of that also in our presentation today.
Let me ask you a question. I'm going to start with a few questions that are coming up here. So you have enterprise architecture started in the 80s, and in the 90s it started, really taking off in terms of, the requirements for a CIO. What's caused it to change over the last few years? Why with FISMA and NIST, why is there more focus on this now than we've ever had? What changed in government?
What changed in government is the complexity changed, and most especially, and which we'll talk about probably in a more granular way, Ryan, is the fact that politics, we have to really be cognizant of the fact, and I talk about some of the differences between commercial enterprise architecture and government enterprise architecture, in that on the government side, we are in a political world, and most technology experts, especially at the chief level and even at the management level, we kind of tend to forget that we get so um, surrounded, and we all do this, by the joys of the technology piece and working that technology piece, and we're motivated by that. We kind of lose the consciousness of the fact that we're operating in a very complex government, politically driven environment, and as a result of that, it generates a lot more work. And when I'm saying work, I mean more process, more oversight, more complexity in terms of management. And there's also domains of political um, boundaries that, when become crossed, create friction. And of course, the term silos is huge in the government and all levels of the government. So enterprise architecture actually helps in kind of understanding what all these assets are and what they're being used for, especially in the IT environment. And as a result of that, you've seen, especially in the DoD world, um, they've attached mandated security integration diagrams and artifacts and material as part of the funding structure. And so if there's 5 milestones in a huge project, you can best believe at milestone 2, you're going to have to show and tell enterprise architecture, security integration as an example, those kinds of things. So as OMB was enforcing the requirements of federal enterprise architecture, and they were building that into requirements in contract language inside of the government and external as well, even with public-private partnerships with the government. And you see a lot of that with CMMI2 and the requirements to pay attention to classified and unclassified data as a result of some of these requirements. They are definitely on the move to make sure that commercial businesses who do business with the government as well as internal government agencies adhere to FISMA, those laws, and all the other White House memos and cybersecurity acts and different policies that enforce and change how we do technology infrastructure, data, software engineering, systems engineering, all throughout the government, but most especially in the Department of Defense. It's very stringent, it's very narrow, and it's not very flexible. And so, with that kind of situation, enterprise architecture is the way to go to probably navigate all these requirements and stay within your contractual limitations and deliver what's required by the federal government in terms of applications and solutions and systems.
Fantastic. So the slides just came through. We'll have them up in just a second.
Thank you. I'm okay to entertain another question while you're doing that, if that's appropriate.
So a lot of organizations, if they look through all these government regulations and try and understand what they need to comply with, they really struggle to get through the acronym soup and
Yes.
figure out what of these laws and regulations apply to me. Is it realistic to expect the different government agencies to understand this, or is this a case where they really need to reach out to somebody who's an expert in this area to get some guidance?
Good question. Absolutely. I will tell you from working at all levels of government, local, state, federal, tribal, county, the government staff, in most cases, I'm not saying in all cases, I haven't been in all places, obviously, but in most cases, the government does not understand these regulations. They don't understand the complexity. It is multi-department, interdepartment, and they change without knowledge, and they are overlapping, and it's it's as you heard in the last session, Ryan. um, Crystal talked about several people on that team, and all they did all day long every day was keep up the government documentation, and that's very challenging. So the resources of paper and resources of human labor involved in just trying to keep up with the government bureaucracy is enormous, and it's impossible to do, really. So for someone to say we're 100% compliant, that's a very tall order, and it's very challenging. But so all we can do, in efforts to maintain your sanity and do the best you can and meet the requirements and objectives that are given to you. Of course, that is top down. You have to give it your best shot, and that's what we're talking about here. So you have to find very lean processes and lean ways and workarounds, both operationally and politically, to understand what these laws, regulations, and policies. We call this LRP in the government, and this is very challenging for us all.
Okay, good. So your slides are up. We're on your agenda, so
Yeah.
let's go ahead and
How
jump from there.
how do I do that to get
Just,
back to
just
the beginning?
you want to go back?
Let
Here
me
we
see.
go. We're on
Oh,
your introduction slide. Where do you want to start?
that's fine. We can start there and keep going. How do I go forward?
Just tell me next, and I'll click through.
Okay, next. Yep, there we go. And here's our agenda today. So we're basically going to talk about enterprise architecture in all the government sectors and move forward. Okay, so introduction here. Inter- you can go to the next one, Ryan. It's cool. We can go to the next one. Yep. Enterprise architecture in the United States government is applicable to federal, state, local government. And of course, we just talked about the robustly regulated compliance issues from Ryan's question. So basically, it is very challenging, but the important takeaway here is to understand that enterprise architecture in government is just not siloed at the federal level. Enterprise architecture is applicable to all levels of government, and you can take a framework or an initiative such as FIAF and FEA2 and use that and reuse that same approach to a city, a county, um, a local government, um, a government affiliated healthcare organization, or education, of course, which is quasi government. But the point is, enterprise architecture uh, is applicable in government, and I strongly recommend the use of it. And to help us with that, to some of the issues that we talked about with the bureaucracy and the paper and the overlapping compliance, if you look at that bottom point here that I'm making the bullet, it simply says that the future impact of digital automation, digital twins, AI, machine learning, and deep learning, that's going to have a tremendous impact in significantly reducing the time, cost, and the bureaucracy of everything we just discussed in the last 10 minutes. So please keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Government challenges, again, we discussed that and the solutions that are involved in that. Again, as we discuss laws, regulations, and policy, most especially in healthcare, HIPAA is a huge compliance piece that drives everyone nuts trying to implement it. It is very complex, and it deals primarily with healthcare and privacy. That's a really good example of why we kind of deal with the healthcare space as well, because here's a great opportunity to digitize and automate and then find ways to work around these heavily regulated domains such as healthcare, education, and government. One exciting opportunity has arisen here recently along these same lines, and that is the fact that as a result of what we call OSCAL and FedRAMP, because the government is now in that cloud space, the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program allows us the opportunity to maintain security, assessment, privacy, and security, and continuous monitoring and authorization in cloud services and products. So one of the great things that has just happened recently is that OSCAL, which is the open security controls and assessment language, is now mandated as part of the FedRAMP initiative. That letter came out from the White House on the 23rd of July. So when we say FedRAMP now, you're now looking at an opportunity to now tackle what Ryan was asking about, and how do we deal with the layers and layers of different regulations and policies and control baselines and regulatory standards and systems that increase in size and complexity. So the use of OSCAL and the use of FedRAMP in a digital ATO process way, mixing digital enterprise architecture with digital model-based systems engineering. You see some of that down the line. We now have some of the foundation we've always been looking for to move forward in a digital way to reduce the time, the complexity, and the overlapping regulatory requirements that are not going to go away. We're going to have more, because of AI, but we can now start reducing the complexity and minimizing the bureaucracy and paper. And of course, with that, we can reduce the politics involved in all of the decision making process with that. So here's some of the things that we're facing with the differences between commercial and public sector. And here it shows that the government is completely different than the approach because of these complexities, because of the laws, regulations, and policies, and the fact that government is not a business. So you can't apply commercial enterprise architecture methodology in a government environment. You need a team, a diverse team that understands these complexities and can help you navigate some of this. So this is not something you want to try and do, and it could be very costly, and um, you probably won't get the result that you're looking for short or long term. The other piece to this is the fact that we're dealing with a different kind of risk and security and privacy environment now. And now not only federal government, but states such as state of California and North Carolina are now being challenged, and which why they have adopted the risk management framework is to try and help tackle some of these issues at the privacy citizen level. So we have to really kind of pay attention to the fact that political impact brings in transparency and political and public trust issues. And of course, this is all politics, and we have social media now, so we have to pay attention to that because politicians are basically on the line every day for a lot of the decisions we make with enterprise architecture and risk and security and privacy. Next slide. So here's some of the impact of going through some of that. These these initiatives in government definitely put take a hold on your project and your program. You have slow development, reallocations of resources, um, cancellation of project. That's happened to me because of all of this that I talked about earlier, and it can have some significant political pressure in the government. And of course, there's a lot of times, and I've seen this up close and personal, where we're no longer responding to the actual um, application or the solution. All of our needs and services and resources are now being directed toward putting out political fires, and so this could be a big disaster. So you want to pay attention in the government space, doing enterprise architecture and making sure that you really have everything kind of like lined up before you go in. There is a prepare step you should use and kind of do your intelligence on the kind of government office or agency you're going to be dealing with. What is the culture there? Are they ready to do something like this? And even in the prior sessions, I heard some of that information where that's huge, where you really need to understand, is the staff and the entire enterprise leadership top down, are they ready to make this change and take that step into enterprise architecture? Because it is complex, and it gets even more complex when things go wrong. Next slide. Federal agencies are complex, and here's some of the federal challenges. The importance of FEA, words cannot express how important it is in the federal government, most especially again because of FISMA, because of OMB Circular A 130, because of Klinger Cohen. These regulations and requirements are enforced, and they do have mechanisms to see the data from the agencies. And of course, um, as stated in the slide, risk, security, and privacy is paramount to the citizens of the United States, and we have to pay attention to that. Next slide. Here's a look at the state government, which is the role in the state government, and enterprise architecture in state government is different from the federal government. And they focus primarily on at the state level is public safety, social services. And of course, the state of California is one of those states that uses the 853 Rev 5. So they're right in alignment right now to do that FISMA alignment to a federal agency. And of course, with that, under the state role. We have utilities and water and public safety and healthcare, and that's very important with state funding, grants, and all those things. When the federal government gives you money, it comes with strings attached. So you want to pay attention that your data systems, your information systems are not siloed off, and that you have programs such as governance, risk, and compliance and the risk management framework that are identifying your assets and you're meeting the requirements to be able to have the proper resources to align your IT infrastructure to include software development programs, system development programs that kind of speak to the requirements that you need to be a fully efficient government service at the state level. Next slide. Here are some challenges with cities, very similar to state. I'm not going to repeat a lot of this, but it's just the fact that the cities have the same issues primarily that the states have, but most especially, I noticed in my experience, the further lower you get into the city hierarchy of government, the worse the application portfolio and the systems portfolio get in terms of legacy and classical. And with that is the older bureaucracy, the older processes tend to be more at that county city level, and it's very challenging there. And here's where I think there's a wonderful market opportunity for enterprise architecture to, in a digital way, of course, to come in and streamline and help cities and counties identify all these legacy systems and start that, as we call, that digital acceleration to a new frontier, utilizing enterprise architecture and digital systems engineering to help re-engineer and modernize these existing bureaucratic, very old systems that do not deliver the proper citizen services that our tech savvy up and coming generations are looking to use right now. Thank you. Next slide. Here are some of the county government solutions and challenges that we spoke of earlier. Here in this particular slide, I'm just highlighting very simply um, a healthcare approach that is very typical and very common for county government. They have a very heavy county healthcare presence that they have to administer, and of course, we've seen a lot of that and heard a lot about that, and a lot of it was exposed during the COVID crisis. And so, definitely, we found that the role of county governments in situations such as a major healthcare crisis, such as COVID, but they also do day-to-day healthcare approaches for the citizenry, and that is directly linked to their clinical services, the preventive and promotive services, in addition to planning and monitoring that they do, on a day-to-day basis as part of their mission. So the county government is heavily involved in healthcare, and here's where laws, regulations, and policies and overlapping compliance definitely comes into play, and most especially here, there's HIPAA, PHI, and PII. So this again is another opportunity where enterprise architecture helps speak to a lot of that and help them streamline the bureaucracy and the overlapping complexities of compliance. As stated in the previous slide, basically, I'm just repeating some of that in terms of the patient care and the comprehensive enterprise architecture integration and digital opportunities that lie with that. Next slide. The education sector challenges, same as county, same as state. We have some very serious data issues at schools. Schools generate, and education, they generate a lot, an enormous amount of data, and it's all over the place, and it's not managed very well. And again, they have the complexities of regulation, overlapping policies, the politics and the political oversight that makes it all pretty complex. And enterprise architecture again comes into play here that helps streamline a lot of this confusion. And by implementing enterprise architecture as part of these solutions, I think we can really make a lot of headway, save a lot of time, and save a lot of money. Next slide. So this is a huge slide because a lot of the GRC, the governance, risk, and compliance that we must implement at the senior executive buy-in level in the board, that comes in the way of policy. And if we can find a way, and we can find a way, and we heard some of it in some of the sessions in the last couple of days here, find a way to digitize this policy. And when that policy hits the enterprise, we now have the tools and the processes and the models to be able to take this policy and do some great things with it in terms of abstraction and diagramming and modeling, and then being able to take that policy and implement it, and especially along the lines of security, risk, policy, controls, and compliance, we can now digitize all of that. But again, policy is a huge component of that success because it comes in alignment to the digital governance piece, and we want to do digital governance, risk, and compliance in conjunction with those government former paper oriented laws, regulations, and policy. So what we're saying at the bottom of the slide here is let's push for AI driven policy making with, of course, human in the loop and human on the loop. Here's just a snapshot of the Federal Enterprise Architecture Framework, and commonly referred to as FEA2 as well, and some of the players in this space. Um, 2 points here, and then we'll move on. The performance reference model, strongly recommended you use use cases and scenarios and do that at the GSA use case template level. And of course, we're excited to see that with that PRM, it goes into every one of these models, which is very important. The BRM, DRM, ARM, IRM, data, application, infrastructure, business, and the KPIs as a result of that performance reference model must be in every one of these models, and that is very linear here. And you see SRM, the security reference model, and of course security, risk, purpose, risk, and controls in every model. So we were very excited to see this implemented in this way. And of course, we're taking account of all of our assets in this process. So you're looking at your IT portfolio from an enterprise perspective and then applying enterprise reference architecture organization wide. And by doing this, we now have an opportunity to account for all of our assets in the enterprise and then begin that journey of digital acceleration. Next slide. EA helps us solve integration and convergence issues in government. And of course, we talked about all those things. There are challenges, but please keep in mind, we don't want to take all of our resources and put them in areas that are not critical. So the takeaway from this slide is this: identify your critical areas of need, your critical problems, your critical issues, and then go look for, as you saw in the FEA2 slide, all of your digital high value assets, AVA, and then start putting your resources, your critical scarce government resources on those things that are important to your organization and that have political impact immediately, both tactically and strategically. Political capital is very precious in that environment. Thank you. Next slide. How does enterprise architecture benefit all of government? Well, it's the strategy and of course the interoperability, the complexity and delivery of efficiency to citizen services and services actually to us all. So we all want government services that respond. I mean, we deserve that. And I think this slide kind of says it all. We really have to do a much better job, and enterprise architecture can really benefit all levels of government. Again, I'm reinforcing enterprise architecture is just not a federal government approach. We're talking holistic government at all levels. So by doing that, we have an opportunity to align government services, to actually share government data. We have complete line of sight from down to from a hospital through a school district, through a city, a county, a state, and the federal government to whatever that agency is. Next slide. The benefits of enterprise architecture in government, as I stated previously, are definitely from a multi-compliance, multi-level approach. We want to streamline the operations, and we want to make sure we have a team approach to data and collaborative sharing. And of course, we have a unified strategy to do our digital acceleration at all levels of government. Next slide. AI, of course, we had many conversations about this in various groups. Bottom line here, enterprise architecture is not uh, immune from AI and machine learning and deep learning. So we're looking forward to the challenges of that in the future. And we're seeing it happening right now as part of what we're discussing in the Sparks global presentations from all our players here today and yesterday. And most especially to remember here, the good takeaway is the fact that we're looking to combine digital model-based systems engineering with digital enterprise architecture. And doing it this way, in some cases, may give us the opportunity to be able to deal with complex risk, complex cybersecurity, complex physical security, compliance, privacy, and most especially digital resilience. And that is a very important component for government where we continue to operate even after we've been attacked, even after we've had a disaster. So we combine disaster recovery, business impact analytics, and COOP as part of that digital acceleration process because cities, state government, federal government, we have to continue to operate and deliver those badly needed services, especially in a time of crisis to our citizens and our families and our communities. Next slide. Most citizens now are becoming digital savvy and they have expectations. So now we want to move from smart city design to intelligent city design, saying that automation and digital services, especially in the transportation corridors and government services corridors, and delivering services that optimize the use of the best possible technology we can deploy. Of course, there's a cost for all of this. And so we don't get a second chance in a lot of instances when you're a government IT employee or staff member. You don't get a second shot. We're not a business. You kind of make that mistake, the funding opportunity for that may not ever come around again. So we want to make sure that we use enterprise architecture to help build those foundations of smart, intelligent cities without wasting taxpayer money in that process and not having overlapping bureaucratic redundancies in interfering with the process and streamlining of digital acceleration in that roadmap. Next slide. Of course, at the top, we need buy-in. We need as said in previous panels and discussions, you have to have top level buy-in, your board, your C-level staff, your agency heads. And the best way to do this, in Beehive's experience and my own experience, is make sure that you establish a governance, risk, and compliance program in the beginning, and then build in your risk management framework through enterprise risk management programs, and then execute the risk management framework programs and your enterprise architecture programs through those components. But again, governance, risk, and compliance with with a government environment is almost mandated. Without it, it's very tough to get a lot of things done. And I doubt very seriously you will get the resources you need without a GRC program, without buy-in from the risk officer, the senior staff, and your board and your executive team. Next slide. Here's the importance of enterprise architecture. Again, as we talked about, federal, state, local government, and we're addressing technological concerns at all levels. Again, the future impact, in my opinion, is the digital-based, model-based systems engineering approach with digital enterprise architecture, which will give us enhanced efficiency and reduction of technical debt. And of course, we're after that digital citizen service delivery. And these are our key strategies for success: training, upskilling, preparing for the fourth industrial revolution. And of course, with that, we need to build out of teams, collaborations, and of course, keeping in mind change is dynamic. We need to do a better job of doing change management, and we need to do a better job with continuous improvement and continuous integration in that process. And of course, with that will come a continuous digital risk security monitoring, both physical security, cybersecurity risk, and privacy. And that way we avoid the pitfalls of compliance that seems to jump out and say, I got you, and then stop the project, stop the program, stop the actual system development life cycle, and then we're trying to start all over again, and then the project is behind, the program's behind, and then we all lose. So I think with enterprise architecture at the foundation, with a GRC approach at the foundation, we're well on our way. Next slide. Again, thank you all for coming today. We appreciate it. Again, I'm Patrick Simon, Beehive Technology Solutions. We're a small disabled veteran-owned business, and we appreciate Ryan. And again, sorry for the delay and the technical difficulties. Thank
Okay, so
you.
Patrick, we actually have time for a couple of questions here.
Okay.
The first question is, you mentioned the importance of readiness. What are some of the red flags that indicate that an organization is not yet ready, and what can be done to help make an organization ready for EA?
Some of the yes, some of the red flags I see immediately, and you do your again, you have to kind of do some intelligence on the organization, is the actual structure of the IT teams and the business teams. And this is my approach and my philosophy by experience. I like to see diversified EA teams that have a business person, an enterprise architect, a systems engineer, a business analyst. And so when you see staff scattered all throughout the organization in different places, and they're kind of cubbyholed away, and you don't see an active movement as a one collaborative effort. That's a big red flag that there's some silos in politics and um, some boundaries that are not being crossed, and it's not a holistic enterprise culture, and that's not a healthy culture to begin digital acceleration and the acceptance of something like enterprise architecture. Remember, that first word is enterprise. Enterprise implies a holistic approach. That's the entire organization. And that's why I pointed to governance, risk, and compliance. You have to change that culture to make it collaborative. And only that comes from the top. Change comes from the top. It's not a bottom up approach.
Okay, building on that, one last question. Governments are masters of compartmentalization. AI seems to be contrary to that, in that it spreads information to everyone. Can EA help governments provide a safe way to break down the silos?
Absolutely. In one of my slides in the slide deck, I speak to it briefly, probably in a couple of places. And again, this is my opinion and philosophy based on my experience. It's time to eliminate how we've been doing IT in local, state, federal government. I would immediately start rewriting organizational structure. I would rearrange departments. I would start rewriting job descriptions. And basically, what you would see is a new digital operations center that is very AI centric, full of automation, and using workbooks, digital playbooks, digital templates, and we can reuse this material. And of course, as you've seen in other enterprise architecture panels, presentations, and discussions, we now have patterns and models that we can reuse. 80% of what we're doing at all levels of government, it's nothing unusual. All cities are basically structured the same way. Federal agencies are basically structured the same way. So we can take this material and use artificial intelligence and deep learning and automation and now create these templates and playbooks and digital tools and services to be able to do this in a very fast and efficient way. So yes, we can tear down those silos, but of course we have to start. As you're building a house, we're building a new digital foundation for a new digital government future. We have to stop somewhere and stop spending the money, stop wasting time, stop telling the lies. I mean, this has to stop. We can't afford it anymore. I mean, we all pay taxes as well. And so those of us who are in this business, this has a lot of impact. And we're scratching our heads saying, we can do this, we can do this a lot better. And all we need to do is make sure our politicians and the people that are running this show, that we hold them accountable and responsible, and we let them know we want to change. We want a digital change, and we want it now. So it's a collective effort.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, with that, I'd like to thank you, Patrick, for taking some time to share with us today. Sorry for the technical issues, but we got through it. And thank you for all the folks who attended live during the event. The session recordings will be posted on the EA Global Summit website and the Collaborate YouTube channel after the event wraps. And if you'd like to arrange a call with Patrick, his contact information is here. You can also reach out to the team at sales at sparksystems.us, and our team will be happy to get you connected with Patrick. The next session will actually begin in about 8 minutes. And that session builds on this one and addresses the procurement and deployment issues with implementing Sparx in federal agencies. So thank you again for joining this year's EA Global Summit, and we look forward to seeing you on our next event. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.